Back with us on the SportsMax Zone. We'll talk cricket now because the first test between West Indies and Sri Lanka at the Sir Vivian Richards ground in Antigua has ended in a draw. The Sri Lankans started, well, the Windies rather started day 5 on 34 for 1, needing 41 more to win, and they finished 202 behind. Well, they finished on 236 for 4 of an even 100 overs, and Nkrumah Bonner 113 not out against Embul Denyaya 2 for 62. So the scores in the game: Sri Lanka 169 and 476, West Indies 271 and 236 for 4. Joining us now to recap the match is that man, Fazeer Mohammed. Fazeer, the result of a draw not surprising even when you assessed things from close of play on Wednesday.
Maybe not surprising in the way that it finished, but I think when you take West Indies cricket in its broader context, and even with the excellent way that they would have performed in in Bangladesh, fighting back so superbly, I think you've got to give the West Indies immense credit for batting through the day, 236 for 4, never really looking in deep trouble. They batted through the entire middle session without losing a wicket. And even when they lost a couple of wickets in the final session, of course, Nkrumah Bonner played the test innings of his young test life. And the West Indies saved the match comfortably. I think it was a tremendous effort by the West Indies all round.
Yeah. Talk to me about the fact that Sri Lanka, after the first day and change, looked as if they were in a hole which they were having difficulty navigating themselves out of. They rallied strongly, and it's a drawn game.
And that's why we often talk about the beauty of Test cricket. It is because over 5 days, you're going to have enough twists and turns. And when it ends in a draw, it will leave almost everyone involved with a bit of a rueful feeling. Sri Lanka feeling that they could have won on the last day, but grateful that they fought back so magnificently. The West Indies, conversely, from a dominant position, feeling that maybe the odds were stacked against them on this last day, but showing that grit, that determination to fight their way through. And that's why Sri Lanka will feel disappointed, yes, with the way that they couldn't push through on the last day. But as their captain, Dimuth Karunaratne, acknowledged, the West Indies batted extremely well. Maybe they tried too hard. Maybe Karunaratne himself didn't attack as much as he should have, with the West Indies clearly not pushing for victory. And in the end, a draw will leave everyone feeling a bit of this, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, going into Monday's second test.
Yeah, Faz, a comment from Nkrumah Bonner on Nkrumah Bonner, but before that, I suggested yesterday when we spoke that with the Sri Lankans getting 100 and 290 plus scores on day 4, it did suggest that the batting conditions were reasonably favourable for a West Indies performance like we had today. So you mentioned just now the application, and credit to the batsmen for sticking to their guns and playing out a result that was not a defeat, which we've seen the West Indies many times lose from positions that they were entering the final day on.
Absolutely right, Lance. And before we talk about an appreciation even more of Bonner's innings, that point you just made, we've seen the West Indies before in the distant past, the not too distant past, capitulate in similar batting conditions where the opposition would have posted 400, 500, 600, and you describe it as the flattest pitch you'd ever see, and the West Indies are bowled out twice in 2 days. We've seen that happen before. So that's why you need to give credit to the way the West Indies would have ensured that on this final day, there were to be no real stutters and alarms, and really lived up to what would have been expected on a surface like this, because it's just the simple pressure of having to bat through a last day to ensure a draw, and they did so comfortably. As for Nkrumah Bonner, let's remember that this young man is not so young. He's 32 years of age. And from a cricketing sense, he's closer to the end of his test career than he would have been had he been a bright 19-year-old, 20, 21-year-old, which he was 10 years ago. And everyone looked to him as someone who would have been able to go on to great things at West Indies level. It didn't happen then, but it's happened now. And look at the scores that he's given us. In the second innings in Bangladesh, in that famous victory, 86. 90 in the first innings in that second test match in Bangladesh, which the West Indies win. And then finally, as he said himself in receiving the Man of the Match award, getting the monkey off his back in just his third test with an unbeaten 113, playing in the V. He is the type of player who clearly has curbed that desire for stylish stroke play to ensure that there's solidity. And that's what any test team needs. You need someone who's going to be that anchor. And he certainly was that today. And he's really set the tone for the rest of his test career, however long it goes.
Yeah, you've just touched on something I wanted to press you on, Faz, because we remember he did make his T20 international debut for the West Indies back in 2011 against the English team, which was 10 years ago. And you touched on it just now, that he's not a young person. He has been on the radar for quite some time now. So to what do you attribute this newfound application and determination coming from this Jamaican batsman? Because was it that he didn't work hard enough in the past decade, or were the selectors wrong to overlook him?
It could be all those factors, Lance, but I would say more than anything else, hunger. That knowing that you were so close to being a regular West Indies player and then kept waiting and waiting and waiting and wondering if that chance would ever come. And now that it would have come by virtue of players opting out of the tour of Bangladesh, he's taking it with both hands. It reminds me of the England spinner Graham Swan, who played a test match, I think it was in 1999, somewhere around there, or maybe just a few years earlier. Played just that one test, didn't do too much, and then came back almost 7 or 8 years later, or maybe 10 years later, and turned out to be one of the finest off spinners that England would have ever had. It probably has to do something with getting close to the action, getting a feel of it, a taste of it, and then being left in the wilderness for what seems an eternity. And therefore, when you get that chance once again, yes, you're right, Lance, you work on your game, you take all the positives from what you've been able to do, you ignore when you've been ignored, you ignore all of that. But I think more than anything else, it's the hunger of having waited so long and finally getting the opportunity.
And Faz, a final question before we let you go. Any changes for the West Indies ahead of the second test?
I suppose the only question mark would be around Jermaine Blackwood, whether or not Darren Bravo would get a look in. But again, so much of it depends on the chemistry within the team. If Blackwood is felt to still be making a significant contribution, would Bravo be the better option? You've got Campbell at the top of the order as well, who might be a bit of a question mark. But really, you often hear that saying about not changing a winning combination, which I don't necessarily agree with. But at least in this case, they didn't win, but the way they fought right through to the end to ensure a draw and ensure that Sri Lanka's turnaround wasn't complete could really result in a situation, unless they feel maybe Shannon Gabriel needs a bit more work to do, that I don't see too many adjustments to the team as it stands right now.
All right, Faz. Well, thank you again. Always a pleasure to connect with you there in Trinidad. We'll be talking again soon.
Take care.
Of course, our international cricket commentator there, Fazeer Mohammed. We take a short break, and when we come back, Lance Whitaker will be at the track.